I think we all need to take a step back and realise exactly the enormity of what just happened. That Charles Leclerc's reality might have been completely and utterly broken. And it might go to show that no matter who is in charge at Ferrari, it's just going to continue to Ferrari, isn't it? It can break people in really strange and unusual ways. The Las Vegas Grand Prix was the latest and most bombastic example of Charles Leclerc's worldview being totally thrown to the pigeons. Carlos Sainz going against team orders both on the track and off the track to ensure that he could get a podium, thwarting any chance of the Monégasque of getting that for 2 years in a row. Now, in my honest opinion, the entire situation of what went down in Las Vegas completely outdoes every single other encounter that Sainz and Leclerc had. It goes past what happened in Spain of this year. It's even bigger than what happened last year in Monza, when everyone on the pit wall was telling both of their drivers to take no risk. And then what did they go and do into turn 1? They took risk. But right now, Charles is having a reality check, and probably not the first one that he has had whilst racing for the Scuderia. For him, it might be because he can't trust anyone at Ferrari anymore, and that his teammate could easily be his biggest enemy, and that things might be about to change. Now, even though you might be thinking, well, duh, your biggest opponent and rival in Formula 1 or anywhere is your teammate. Yes, you might be saying, well, about time, Charles, that your teammate can easily double-cross you for their own gain and desire for podiums, because, let's be real, Carlos might not be getting any of those for a while. But either way, this could easily be it for Charles Leclerc. This could be the opportunity for him to rise to his full potential and become the true example of Leclerc that he can possibly be. Or it could easily see him lose the leadership of Ferrari and Lewis Hamilton just takes it and it's handed to him on a plate. Because we can easily compare and contrast now, because Leclerc started his time at Ferrari against a multiple world champion, and now after a few years of practice and experience, he's going to be doing the same thing again. Another multiple world champion. Now, I'm quite sure that you're all familiar with Charles Leclerc and misfortune when it comes to things not going his way. It being down to either the Ferrari strategists getting their calls wrong, the car going wrong, the race going wrong, or he himself getting it wrong. Now, I'm not going to sugarcoat it. Charles Leclerc's time in Formula 1 has seen some success. He has won multiple races, he's got loads of pole positions, but at the same time, it's been so riddled with misfortune and maladies that it's borderline tragic. Because there have been so many moments that the team has inflicted so much pain on the guy, as well as himself inflicting so much pain on himself, that it needs to be studied for generations. Yes, I am seeing all of the parallels between himself and Jean Alesi, in him not really maximising his full potential. Although, Charles has won many more races than Jean. But in all seriousness though, I am not writing off Charles Leclerc at all. The raw talent is there. That kind of person is able to go toe-to-toe with Max Verstappen and come out of it the other side, completely unshaken, unfazed, and gaining the respect of the now 4-time world champion. But even though he has that, and he has got a very charismatic look, he is certainly a looker, there are now certain situations whenever he makes a mistake, and given how he looks right now, that I am just compelled randomly to just simply shout, Hammond! But this time around, the situation regarding Charles and his possible mistake was down to him wholly trusting in the process the team laid out for him. That there would be no pressure put upon him from his teammate or anyone else, and the only thing he needed to do was to bring the car home and look after his tyres. Especially considering that nobody on the grid, literally nobody, had run the hard C3 tyre because they only got 2 sets each. So they are like gold dust, and it proved to be just the case. This is ridiculous, but hey, Pirelli, don't you dare change the compounds, because this works. This is interesting. We like this. Do not change it. What also made the race interesting was how Ferrari handled their drivers when Carlos came steaming up to Charles. And when I say interesting, I mean horrific, and also same old, same old. And he just sailed past him, leaving now the overtaken racer fuming. After all of the agreements that they had, Sainz yielding earlier, but then he overtook him anyway, and we all heard what Leclerc said over the radio. He swore like a sailor. And that was the crescendo after many little snips and snipes throughout the entire race. My particular standout quip was, maybe try explaining it to Carlos in Spanish. I'm like, oh, that's a bit of a low blow there. And yeah, I'm not gonna lie, there is good cause for him to be that jaded and angry, because Carlos does have a history of going against team orders for his own benefit to try and get the strategy that he wants. But that being said, Leclerc had made things more difficult for himself, because All of that stuff becomes moot when you actually realise that in the first stint of the race, he cooked his tyres trying to overtake Russell, who had demonstrated throughout the entire weekend that he and Mercedes were completely unopposable. And you know what? It's actually making me think back to the Azerbaijan Grand Prix. This is almost a similar situation, only happening at the beginning of the race instead, where he was battling with Piastri after he was caught napping, Oscar overtook him, and then he spent the rest of the race trying to take that place back, the lead, and then eventually, behind all of that dirty air, behind the McLaren, he completely baked his tyres and then fell back quite considerably. He tried too hard, he didn't back off, because let's be real, Mercedes had no clue why they were so fast, we had no clue why they were so fast, the drivers had no clue. So why should Charles have a clue? I mean, if he did have a clue, we'd just have to rename him Charles Leclerc. But in a way, he was still right to be angry at that situation at that precise moment, even though the situation he really didn't help. He was promised something, and the promise was trampled on, either through Carlos ignoring team instruction, or Ferrari instructing Leclerc to ease off, then worried that he might bake his tyres again if he were fighting Carlos like he did in the first stint. So either way, it's really not a good look. It was a big mess for the team, all concerned, despite the car itself being a good one. And I bet Ferrari were fuming because they thought going into Las Vegas that they were destined to be getting in with a win, because they thought that all of the data and correlations that they've been doing in the wind tunnel, preparations for this race, that it was going to be theirs for the taking, but then Mercedes just come along and then just completely strip it from them. So basically, Ferrari are not happy campers this weekend at all. And even with them getting a podium, it was still tainted. But then again, can you imagine what would have happened if this had been for the win, that Carlos had snatched the win from Charles? It would have been about a bajillion times worse. We'd be talking about this for days. It would go down in history as the moment Charles Leclerc broke. So with the situation now made clear that Carlos has got nothing to lose now, despite hoping for a second stint with Ferrari in the future, this is probably not helping. Maybe after Lewis Hamilton has had a go in red, Charles is prepared to run roughshod over the C2 campaign Ferrari has fostered to make it look all buddy-buddy in the wake of Lando at McLaren, which to me honestly looked a far lot more genuine and has endured to this day. And when I went to the F1 exhibition, they put Lando and Carlos's pedestals and statues right next to each other, but right now Charles Leclerc has said for the last two races it's going to be a whole different story, and he's painting a really interesting picture. I am not happy about Carlos, but I won't go into details. Why? Because we talk about these things before the race, and I'm always the only one who respects those agreements. From now on, I will be thinking about myself only. It's a shame that I couldn't get more points on Norris. And he's right to be irritated by that too, because Carlos taking matters into his own hands and snatching the podium away from him took away 3 valuable points that could have closed the gap to Norris for second place in the championship. And considering that Lando Norris himself is quite worried about the overall state of his car, and that its performance has fallen off on the last few races, some would argue because it's down to the effect that the mini DRS wing had, and it being nerfed was a bigger impact than first thought, Leclerc was looking to really capitalise on the forward momentum that has been seen from the Scuderia since Monza, and all of the FP1 experiments they've been doing for 2025, apparently all the feedback was quite positive, they looked optimistic, so maybe Leclerc fancied his chances to maybe score some valuable points against the likes of Lando. And yes, I know it's not the World Championship we're talking about here, but I'm pretty sure that Charles would like to get second place in the standings for a second time, and to rub further salt into the wound that Lando's Norris feelings now that McLaren and he were not ready to take on Max Verstappen and Red Bull would be made even more evident. Well, instead of all of that positivity, the results of Vegas put his nose squarely out of joint, and it does sum up the situation that is quite obvious now, and has been a major talking point throughout the entire season, that Max has nobody equipped or able to challenge him over the course of a whole year. They simply don't have the spine. And it's also really clear now that it's not all about having the fastest car, Lando, because Verstappen admitted that for about 70% of 2024, he did not have the fastest car, and he was not afraid to tell Zach Brown that and said, "Hey mate, I managed to win the championship without the fastest car, lol." And yeah, I still think that that was quite cold. To this day, I've heard it so many times now. Ugh. And it's also got something to do with having a guy behind the wheel prepared to stomp on some toes to get their way, even if it's their own team backing them up that they're treading on the toes of. And that is a genuine question. I think you need to have 3 components to really have a sustained attempt at going for the championship, especially when that Dutchman is around. You've got to have the car, the balls, and the backup. For me, I personally think that Piastri for sure will have all 3 qualities for next year, and Russell could have them so long as the W16 is a far more consistent machine that both he and Kimi Antonelli can make use of throughout the entire year, instead of being left guessing as to whether or not it'll play ball in a particular race, like it did in Vegas, and it probably won't for the final 2 races of this year. I know you might be thinking I'm downing on Mercedes, but let's be real, right now, because of the whole temperature issue of the W15, this was a blip. A very nice and welcome blip for all. It did generate a really nice story, but it's a blip nonetheless. But hey, if George can capitalize on this and gain some confidence when he becomes the Mercedes team leader, and he has shown that he is not afraid to take on Max Verstappen both in terms of words and on the track, I think he might do well. I really want to see what George can do in a consistently fast and front-running car. I'm intrigued. Lewis Hamilton might have all 3 as well, providing Ferrari are a lot clearer with their orders and calls regarding strategies, and that might be something that has gotten under Charles's skin. The tirade he fired toward the race engineer, that was not supposed to be public, was simply him bubbling over with angst and concern that had been dogging him for years. Again, it became very, very clear that Leclerc kept his radio on and that he didn't mean for that tirade to be broadcast to the entire planet, and he was very sheepish in the media pen, realizing his mistake, and that basically it allowed his own teammate, who had basically run roughshod over him and Ferrari to get the podium because he sensed an opportunity and he took it, which is good, very good alpha material, but it doesn't really gel well for Ferrari. But it did ultimately lead for Carlos to play him in the media pen of his own, with many other talks and warnings regarding conduct with Ferrari, which are accurate as well, because in a way, arguing over the radio doesn't really solve anything. But then, Carlos, you are one to talk, because even though I really respect your ability, and you are quite a good driver, you also do complain over the radio as well when things aren't going your way, because let's not forget the whole thing about stop inventing and then completely denouncing Ferrari strategy. What was he doing throughout the entire Vegas weekend? He was complaining about them bringing him in or not bringing him in at the right time, and then he ran the risk of getting a penalty for running over the lines before the pit stop, which ultimately, thankfully, because the race director saw it and the way it was handled and the way the track is composed, it was only a track limits violation. But it did allow Carlos to clap back quite well and quite fairly. A word of caution he gave against impulsive public outbursts, highlighting the potential harm to the team's image and internal cohesion. And honestly, I think he does have a point there, because it did throw Ferrari into question. But again, Carlos did the same thing with his own protests for now and the entire year and a couple of years before then, when Ferrari looked really competitive. But either way, for the sake of fairness, I'll provide what Carlos said to you. Ahem. We were ahead of Lewis, and it had already been a couple of laps since I asked to pit, so it meant that we were both losing a lot of race time at the same time. There was this situation where I had to let Charles by. I lost a lot of time. I'm not going to lie, I am pretty unhappy about it. But at the same time, Mercedes was just quicker. I don't like using the radio to complain or to do anything. I don't like using the media to criticize or demonstrate or prove that I am unhappy or not. I prefer to do that behind closed doors, because there are never any good outcomes from this kind of comments to the media. The whole situation was a bit messy, and I am the first one who is not happy, but it is what it is. So I guess he's not happy, but I am also not happy with the way things were handled at the time. No one's happy today in the team, because we all expected a bit more. So, yeah, unfortunately, Charles, you were right to be angry about Carlos, but ultimately, Carlos got the last laugh. But Carlos is correct in stating that nobody in the team is probably happy with how the race went down, and many people were reporting to me on my Blue Sky, link down on the pinned comment by the way if you're making the switch, that Fred Vasseur was conspicuous with his lack of congratulations for Carlos straight after the race, and proceeded to then brush aside to the media the criticism from Charles, stating that these kind of tirades, they aren't all that rare, and that the driver didn't have the bigger picture at play from his place in his own race. That things would become clear for he and Carlos in private in the driver's debrief and with regular private conversations. Whilst this is very valid from Fred Vasseur to be saying that really they should be talking about these things in private, and that ultimately this can be corrected once Charles realizes the bigger picture of what was going on with all of the data. The only things that he's finding out are from the radio and the team themselves and from the screen on his own steering wheel, but that's mainly just for his car and things that he needs to know at that specific time. It does seem like a matter of concern though for me personally that Leclerc's worries aren't being taken to heart. And granted, This rhetoric from Vasseur could be down to understanding how Leclerc operates, having nurtured him from his junior racing days and at Sauber during his rookie year in F1. And honestly, it's probably better to try and diffuse the situation instead of just simply ignoring it, or maybe trying to double down or picking sides and whatnot. So Sainz in that regard did do very well by just basically saying, we should really be talking about these in private instead of spreading it out to the public. What were you thinking, Charles? And then Charles just going, yeah, oh dear, oh oops, I really shouldn't have done that. So yeah, again, Leclerc had the opportunity to try and come out as the bigger person. I don't think he did, but again, he was pushed to it. But right now, it is very important to have a sense of unity between the two drivers, and right now, it's looking a little bit precarious, and this is right when McLaren don't look as solid as they have done this year, and Red Bull have effectively got one arm tied behind their back, what with Checo's struggles and maladies in regards to the Constructors. But Leclerc now openly saying he's going to be thinking more about his own race in a public forum, that's really not comforting news for the Scuderia or Vasseur. This is really worrying, and it could easily cause the Monégasque to become disillusioned not only with Formula 1, but with the team that he has cherished for oh so long, ever since he was a little boy. If things keep up the way they are right now, I could easily say Leclerc exiting sooner than what his current contract is actually stating, 2029. Wait, Law, what are you trying to say? Are you saying that perhaps by the end of 2027 we could see Ferrari have a completely different lineup? Hamilton and Leclerc gone? Well, yes, but it depends. If Ferrari is in a good place with the new regulations and both drivers are happy with each other and the team, then all will be fine. Well, I mean, the only person who would be unhappy about this would be Oliver Behrman, who would have been hoping for a call-up to Ferrari sometime sooner rather than later. But as we've seen throughout Formula 1's history, especially with Ferrari, team harmony is transitory. It can easily falter or collapse when titles or regular victories are on the cards. 2016. Need I say more? This force is so strong and immovable and impossible to try and counter, it can tear apart long-lasting friendships that have been around since childhood. Rosberg and Hamilton, they still don't really speak to each other. It's never recovered. Leclerc was born and bred effectively to become a Ferrari driver and to embody the team as he stepped up to F1, then to Ferrari, and then to lead the Scuderia toward better times, which he has done admittedly alongside Fred Vasseur. Now, you cannot deny that after the depths of 2020, Ferrari have been able to turn themselves around and become an outfit that can be competitive, especially this year. The fact that we are even talking with 2 races to go that they could win the Constructors for the first time since 2008, that is huge progress to where we were back in even 2021, and trust me, Ferrari are a lot more stable than they were in the 2010s. However, Ferrari is going to continue to Ferrari. The same old mistakes and misfortunes still do crop up, albeit less frequently than they used to. However, that does mean that they actually have a bigger impact due to the scarcity of them, instead of it happening almost every other race where people could just easily become numb to the sensation. But I am getting a sinking feeling that Leclerc is slowly becoming disillusioned with the Ferrari Grandmaster plan at the worst possible moment. But that being said, it's not all doom and gloom. This could be the making of Leclerc into a driver who is far less averse in taking risks and will take a leaf out of Sainz's book perhaps and make calls spontaneously that he believes will work out since he is the one in the car. If Ferrari can patch things up, because let's be real, I think they've only got themselves to blame for this particular situation with only 2 races to go, but maybe Carlos's last lesson to Charles is to never trust your teammate, that they could easily backstab you, and that you've got to have an answer to them at any given time, and to actually listen to your own initiative, even though the pit wall is telling you to not trust it and go with their own wishes, because sometimes it pays off. I mean, we've only got to look what's happened with Carlos. His own calls have actually led to some success, albeit for him, and he does step on toes at Ferrari, but so be it. But maybe this is something that is not simply compatible with Ferrari, but it might actually pay dividends along at Williams when they honestly need somebody to guide them right now into their own next chapter. And Alex Albon should be really seriously concerned at the moment because, hey, team orders, there might be an agreement, Carlos might run over it, but then James might be so smitten with Carlos that he might not even care because, hey, they got points! But in an ideal scenario, we could see something bold from Charles on the moment when he transforms and exerts his full potential against Max Verstappen, like the good old days in karting. This could be fantastic for us. Like how it's dawning with everyone else that if you want to get the better of the Dutchman on a regular basis, you have to upset people, even if it's your own team. But then there's Lewis Hamilton to consider as well. Now, you cannot deny, Leclerc and Hamilton have done a really good job in preparing themselves for 2025, knowing that things might not be easy, so it's really good to get to know one another personally, as well as having dogs, having that common affinity, and I do feel like it could pay dividends in the short term, especially if it turns out that Ferrari have got the rules wrong and they need to actually band together to try and get something out of it. That could be really, really good, and something that we saw from Sainz and Leclerc in 21, and in some cases in 2023. But Lewis isn't afraid of taking matters into his own hands if there is a chance for a win on his own part or a title campaign. And with the boss of the company giddy with excitement for his first day in the office, is this gloves off moment from Charles too little too late? Could it get in the way of Ferrari's own hopes for the Constructors, which are totally all to play for as of now, and will go all the way to the final race? Personally, I think the momentum is heading toward Lewis Hamilton, because that advantage that Charles has had in Fred Vasseur understanding his every single move and understanding his character, that is now effectively equal with Lewis Hamilton, who he was training with ART back in GP2. Sure, it was a much longer time ago, but he might be one of the best people to understand Lewis when his back is up against the wall, because with Toto, he's only really known Lewis Hamilton when it's been all good, all gravy, when it's all been plain sailing. But in the moments of adversity, Toto and Lewis's relationship has been strained and might now be broken. And with Ferrari's plans to adapt the 2025 Ferrari more to Hamilton's driving style before he has left Mercedes, that could really push Leclerc into a corner and either cause him to step up more or completely collapse and ensure that the lineup eats itself, much like how McLaren could see happen with them, with Norris and Piastri bicker amongst themselves. And then all the while, Max Verstappen is just laughing off into the sunset with another world championship under his belt, because all of the other rivals of his, they're bickering amongst themselves with their own team, and it might only be up to George Russell to be able to challenge him to some extent if the W16 turns out to be good. And even then that may be brought into question, because Kimi Antonelli has the goal of winning a race next year. That kid is ballsy and could easily disrupt George's plans right after he managed to best Lewis Hamilton. Can that guy get a break? But yeah, I think Ferrari is looking out for Lewis, and Charles is running out of time to really assert himself, and this little outburst did not help, because Ferrari's dropping $100 million a year on his own teammates, so that's a big chunk of change. And to find out why I think Ferrari's plan for next year is quite plain to see, and really trying to benefit Lewis as best as they can with the time he has with them, go and watch this video next straight after this one.